Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. Have you ever had a bad day? Imagine piloting a borrowed, out-of-control helicopter to make an emergency landing on the on-ramp of a Columbus expressway with an 18-wheeler quickly approaching. Now that's a really bad day. Add to that being $50 million in debt, a divorce, and how bad the recession was to someone in real estate. Let me introduce you to my guest today, Pat Finley. He took all of these experiences and a few more and wrote a book about what he has learned about survival. Hopefully, most of us won't have to survive a plane crash to learn REACH, R-E-A-C-H, firsthand. Pat's point in spinning into control is that we all have the ability to survive something, whether it's cancer, a divorce, a horrible accident, or the unexpected loss of a loved one. So welcome to my viewers and welcome to Pat Finley.
Thank you, Leslie. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. And you know what? In some odd way, our paths have touched a few times, say, over the last 10 to 15 years. But in some odd way, all of this survival makes you such a more interesting person. Do you feel that way?
I'm just a regular guy, Leslie. I really am.
Just a regular guy who climbs Mount Kilimanjaro with his 79-year-old father.
Just about anybody can. It's my 79-year-old father that deserves accolades, that's for sure.
We'll come back to that, but parasailing once was my limit, so.
I can understand that might be dangerous.
It might be. Now, let's first go back 15 or 20 years. You know, you were self-made then. You were successful, you were self-made, you were a member of the coveted YPO, Young Presidents Organization. You had a helicopter pad on top of your building. And did you then have one at your home too?
Yes.
One at your home too. Did you think you had it made?
No, there was always some place to strive to get to. Still is.
And there still is. Because there is something higher than Mount Kilimanjaro, right? Figuratively and literally?
Exactly, exactly.
So you survived differently then. You used skills to make yourself and your company very successful. So your survival then was more in the financial and in the competitive kind of world. But were any of the same skills that you used to make your company successful, would you later identify them as survival skills, or were they different skills?
They're one and the same, Leslie.
The
same steps that we use in positive circumstances to achieve goals, to attain our dreams, they're one and the same 5 steps that I point out in the book. And it's so simple, but it has, to the best of my knowledge, has never been spelled out by any author. So I felt a duty to do so.
You know, I tell my clients in my coaching part of my practice all the time, simple and easy are not the same thing. It can be simple, but it doesn't mean that they're easy.
Very true.
Right? Like the game of
golf. Especially in the heat of the moment.
So let me ask you, how did you come up with your title? Because spinning into control, we usually think of spinning that it almost dictates that you're losing control of something. So tell us about the title, Spinning into Control.
Well, I think when we're all in circumstances that we're feeling out of control, it's important to note that you have the ability to get it back into control. So the title, Spinning into Control, really is meant to bring the big question mark up. What does that mean? And when you dig into it, you see the true meaning of it is you're out of control to begin with, but you're spinning into control by your own devices, by your own choice.
Now, this book and your story start out with a helicopter crash on an on-ramp in Columbus. What was the scariest thing? Because there were a few. To the reader, there were a few scary things. And I imagine to your passengers, there were a few scary things. What to you was the scariest thing about that crash?
Well, I had been a pilot for quite some time. I'm a commercially rated helicopter and airplane pilot, and I had always been in control at all times. Of course, we train for emergency circumstances, but there's a certain point that you reach, whether it's in life or whether it's driving down the road, or whether it's flying a helicopter, that you sort of feel like it's not going to happen to you. The realization that it really is happening, no matter what that is we're comparing it to, and in the case of the helicopter, the realization that I was spinning out of control and would soon meet my death if I didn't do anything about it, was obviously pretty stunning. I was adrenaline ridden, of course. It felt like I had a basketball in my throat as I was spinning around. The G-force blurred my vision, so therefore you have less and less ability to correct the issue. And counter to what you might think, the best thing for me to do was actually push down towards the ground to gain some speed and some control in that situation, which was essentially the deciding factor between life and death.
So was that something learned, or was that something innate or intuition? So
in training, we trained for circumstances similar, but not exactly like what occurred. I had two things occur at the same time. It was loss of tail rotor effectiveness in a rogue quartering tailwind that hit the back of the helicopter as I was coming in for a landing at one of the most vulnerable points in the flight. And also I was pretty heavy. I wasn't overweight, but I was heavy enough that aggravated the circumstances and increased the velocity of the spin. I was pretty close to the ground. I was 120 feet. I was just above the treetops coming in for a landing, and the next thing you know, I'm spinning in circles. And so the reaction to that was at first to pull up, get away from the ground. You don't want to hit the ground, of course. And that only aggravated the spin, made me spin even more. So the next choice and what we trained for was to actually put the aircraft in a downward position, which allowed me to gain more speed and more control and less spinning. So it was not enough to impact the ground, but it was enough to impact the ground at a level that I could stay alive and my passengers could stay alive. So no injuries.
So no injuries. We'll get to the end of that first. But so what part of just that accident has a lesson that you could take and apply to life?
When you're in the heat of the moment, even if it's a split second, you have to be able to convince yourself you can do something about it. And that's the most difficult thing to do, to take the responsibility, which is the R in the REACH protocol that we'll talk about more. You can actually take responsibility to change the course of what's about to happen. And that's the main point in the book, and it's probably one of the most difficult things to do. It was certainly, there was the possibility of just letting it happen and hitting the ground. It didn't require any action. It was going to happen. But made a concerted decision to actually use some of my training and use some techniques to get myself out of it and to minimize the impact.
So the plane crash actually is going to become kind of a metaphor for your life, or a period of your life. But you crashed a plane that wasn't even yours. You were going through a divorce. You were in a profession that was hardest hit by the recession, I would say, when you agree, and real estate. So now, how do you define adversity?
So adversity is different for everybody. Everybody defines it differently, but what I've learned is that your own adversity, there is no comparison of adversity. When you're in it, it's a horrible circumstance, whether you have a flat tire on the side of the road or whether you have a sick child. It's just a very, very difficult circumstance that requires a cool head to be able to be proactive and empower yourself to solve your problems.
So would you say that your REACH, your 5 steps, do they help a person, give them a strategy to have a cool head? You identified five steps to survive one's own adversity. So does that help you, do those 5 steps help you keep that cool head? It's
a tool, like any tool in the toolbox. It's like a Swiss Army knife for the mind, if you will, whereby if you use these 5 simple steps, and in some cases you'll get halfway through the REACH protocol, the 5 steps, and you'll have to turn back and start over again. And the looping process itself will allow you to persevere and get through the circumstance, no matter what it is.
So first, how did you develop the process of 5? And then if you could take us through that step. So how did you develop this process? How did you knowingly identify that you were going through or needed to go through these steps?
Well, you mentioned the REACH protocol earlier. You mentioned the helicopter crash, the divorce, and the carnage that was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, 2010. And of course, I'm a real estate investor and developer, and that part of the industry was hit the worst. I managed to get through and survive through that carnage and those tough circumstances. And what I realized in the process was that it wasn't luck. And I became a student of survival. I wanted to know every survival. I wanted to read about
So what
every
does that
survival.
mean, a student of survival?
So I decided to read books of circumstances that, plane crashes or people being stuck on the side of a mountain, some pretty desperate circumstances. Most of them much, much worse than my circumstance by far. And what I found in studying each one of the survival stories was they used these 5 steps, yet they had not been
Whether
spelled
they
out.
identified them or not, they used them.
They went through these 5 steps. Now, they were called something different. They may have used them in a little bit of a different order, but they all survivors used the REACH protocol in their own way.
Okay, so will you first just identify what each of those letters stands for?
Sure. The R stands for responsibility. Sounds so simple, but what I've witnessed is it's one of the most difficult things to actually do, and it's the cost of admission. You have to take responsibility for your situation before you can go on to the next step. There's a fork in the road. There's a fork to the left. That's the easy road. It's kind of the let it happen road. And there's a fork to the right. It's a gauntlet of obstacles and difficulties. And that's the responsibility side. That's the scaling the mountain, scaling the obstacle, getting the monsters out of the way, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's a much more difficult pathway to take. But it's the one to take if you want to get yourself out of your situation. You have to take the responsibility and take the more difficult road. The E stands for evaluation. Evaluation is gathering up advice from your friends, your family. It could be your advice from yourself, talking to yourself, listening to yourself.
Well, your evaluation had it to be pretty fast in that helicopter.
The evaluation was my thoughts, split-second thoughts of how was I trained? The recollection of similar circumstances and applying it was the evaluation. And it was a split-second evaluation in that case.
We're going to hear the next 3 steps after I reintroduce. Today we are talking with Pat Finley. You could say survivalist or you could say successful entrepreneur, and they're both the same thing, actually. You have to be a survivalist to become a successful entrepreneur, who has written a book called Spinning into Control, which is more of a philosophy about how one can deal with any adversity in their life. So there's a 5-step program. We looked at responsibility and evaluation. Now let's look at the remaining 3 letters.
You've evaluated, you have gathered information. Some of it you're not going to use, some of it you'll use. Somehow you'll know when you gather enough information, you'll know which of the bits of advice that you want to use. Now it's go time. Now it's time to act. So that's the A in the responsibility, evaluation. A is act. So you got to do something about it. You can't sit down and let it happen. Again, very, very simple. The C goes hand in hand with the act. So easy when you are moving ahead and you are trying to solve your problem. It's so easy to lose confidence. It's so easy to listen to the naysayers. You can't do that. You can't get yourself out of that. Nobody's ever done that before.
You can't come back from 3-1 in the NBA Finals, right?
Right, exactly.
Right.
So you have to have the confidence to keep your plan in action. And the last one, the H, is the one that I get the looks. It's happy. How could you be in dire circumstances and need the word happy included? I mean, these are some pretty tough circumstances, but the H essentially goes hand in hand with hope. It goes hand in hand with gaining energy of making the best of the circumstances, and that truly does energize you through the process. And being happy with your incremental progress as you go. It may not be the kind of progress you're used to making, but it's taking a little bit of joy in advancing from out of your difficult situation.
So you had two different kinds of adversity. You had the immediate kind with the pavement coming towards you, and the multi-year kind with divorce and the recession. So are they both the same when it comes to dealing with adversity? Did you use the same skill set, whether it was immediate or in short term or long term?
The steps are the same.
Steps are the same.
It took a degree of taking responsibility. There was a lot of evaluation that went into all of the three different survival scenarios. And I have to tell you, there were times when I didn't do it. So I had to come back and again take responsibility for getting myself out of it. And I had to loop the REACH protocol over and over and over again to get myself back on track. And you'll find that common with survival situations.
Now, although there are 5 steps in REACH, if there was one thing that you would tell someone to do to overcome or to survive adversity, what would that one thing be?
Well, take responsibility is the most important of the steps. We've already talked about it. But the one thing is really more of a realization. The realization that we look at people that survive tough circumstances and we think they're superhuman. They're not. Every single survivor that I studied, every next door survivor that I interviewed, what I found out was they're regular people that did extraordinary things. Doesn't matter who you are, what your character has been, you have the ability to do extraordinary things if you set your mind to it. And that's the one realization that I would love for everybody to understand very, very clearly.
Was there one defining moment in that roughly, say, 10-year period? Was there one defining moment that you look back on that was a catalyst for change for you?
I think the defining moment was the realization that there was real potential loss to be had, whether it was in the helicopter, which was split second. It almost happened before the actual realization of, oh my gosh, what if it would have gone in the wrong direction? It was a realization that my kids were in their early teen years during the divorce, and there was a potential that I could have lost interaction with my children. There was the true potential of that. And then in the carnage, there was in the financial carnage and in the Great Recession, certainly everything that I had worked for in the previous 25 years, loving every minute of it, by the way, was completely at risk. And the realization that everything's temporary. And that I live every single day, understanding that we're in a temporary position. And you know what that does? That makes me appreciate it all that much more.
Sure. If there was a best advice for someone that believes that they're starting out at they're maybe even at the R or before the R in REACH, they know they're in adversity, they haven't started kind of muddling through and a plan to get at what to do to overcome adversity. They're at the beginning of that journey. What would be your best advice in the beginning of that journey?
Stop. Stop and realize that there are good people that are out there that want to help you. Your family, your friends. When you're in trouble, people want to help. And so many people are too proud to ask for help. And so stop and think about it for a minute. Don't do anything rash and ask for help.
Why is Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go, your favorite book?
Well, as you can imagine, and as you've seen, I am an adventurer, and I think it's the ultimate. I think it appeals to a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old. Used to read it to my kids all the time. And, but it also appeals, one of the very few books that appeals to a 106-year-old too. Because there are still places to go when you're 106 years old.
If not, at least in your mind, if not, if you still can't go. In reading about your book, it says the best outcome in any situation is preparation. Reach for it now before your crisis comes to help you engage difficulties and come out the other side a winner. How can one prepare for life's adversity that we may not know what it's going to be?
You know, I prepared and I didn't even know that I was preparing, besides the aviation training and martial arts training and preparing to climb a mountain, etc. What I really prepared for was I built relationships that those relationships made all the difference in the world during hard times. And so it's the golden rule. You're not just making a friend, but that friend is going to help you someday, and you're going to help that friend. So I began the process, unknowingly at the time, I began the process of doing charitable things and helping my friends out and taking that mentality. And what I found was during tough times when there's an avalanche, there were plenty of people helping me dig out. You had a safety net.
You know, I call it like making your web, that you had a safety net.
Yes.
A web, something that could hold you when it felt like you were falling.
Absolutely.
We might look from the outside, and we look again at that helicopter, and we all, I think most of us have some kind of a fear of flying. You probably don't like it when you're not the pilot, right?
I'd rather be the pilot.
That's what I thought. So that kind of becomes the face of adversity for us, but what would you say has been the biggest crisis that you faced to date? Was it that helicopter, or is that helicopter crash just a figurative face for adversity?
Well, as much as the helicopter crash, if you will, was the most dramatic and probably the most able to be talked about and most interesting, it was definitely the death of a family. The scorched earth divorce and the very, very difficult circumstances surrounding the divorce was the most impactful thing in my life that I carry with me today in a positive way, because I've learned from it. But it was the most impactful of all, and certainly the most difficult, more difficult than a helicopter crash and more difficult than owing $50 million at one given time.
That's huge. I think that's a huge lesson. This has gone by so quickly. In the minutes that we have remaining, I'm going to ask you for 1 or 2 word answers so that I can get through as many as I possibly can. I can't talk to you and not ask you something about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with your father, who was 79 3/4 at the time. Why did you want to climb it? And you can't say because the mountain was there. Why did you want to climb a mountain?
I was 50, and I was turning 50, and I actually turned 50 on the mountain, and I wanted to do something impactful and memorable. And also teach myself that when I'm 60, I've got a lot of work to do something as impactful.
And can you answer for your father why a 79 3/4 man climbs Mount Kilimanjaro?
He was sure he could do it.
And he did.
And he did.
And he did. Urban legend has it that you had or have a door in your office that can automatically close from your desk when you're on the phone and in negotiation. Is that true, and why?
It used to be true. I thought it was cool. I loved the gadget. Today, my door is always open.
Is that a consequence of survival?
It is very true, yes, yes.
The last chapter, at the moment, you just returned from taking your now 2 grown sons to Europe. What can you tell parents that may be having a rocky relationship with their teen children or their children at some point?
Have the faith and take the high road. It's, again, like taking responsibility. There's an easy road. Join in all the drama. The more difficult road is the one that's got the gauntlet. It's the one that has the obstacles, but it's the one that's going to lead you to the best place. And by all means, do your very best not to talk ill of the other spouse. Your kids understand. They know that, and they'll remember that. And
there is another side. There is the other side.
Your kids know who you are, much better than you think.
So you just got back from Europe. What was the best thing about Europe?
I spent 10 very condensed days traveling through Italy, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Poland, and the Czech Republic, and it was a whir as we were doing it, and especially on the Autobahn. That was a lot of fun for me.
I'm sure it was.
But the best thing for me was realizing that my 22-year-old son and my 24-year-old son, that probably, as busy as their lives are going to be, that's the last time that the 3 of us will be together in that type of a medium, and that was the most impactful, having meals, being together, and just being.
And what was the best thing about coming home to America?
I love coming home. I love leaving, but I also love coming home because I appreciate it so much more.
Yes.
You can only run into so many guards with AK-47s and crowds, swarms of people before you really yearn for home.
For home. Northeast Ohio especially. Did you ever look at someone and think they have it all? financial success before 40, they're a pilot, they drive a Mercedes, they have an office and a house with a helicopter pad, and then poof. They have to look deep inside themselves and decide if they are a survivor. Our guest today, Pat Finley, is all of the above, including that survivor part. He actually used as many survival skills here in Northeast Ohio, working and living, as he did when he successfully climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with his 79-year-old father, I might add. Spinning into control, he creates and explains his 5 steps to survive any adversity. Along the way, you will meet many seemingly normal, ordinary people, yet are inspirational and extraordinary, such as Wade, Hogue, Rick Duty, and Stephanie Schaefer. His journey began. The helicopter began to spin violently. Your spinning may look different. What is a common thread is a survivor's ability to spin into control, especially when you follow the 5 steps of reach. One I particularly liked that reunited an owner and a puppy. For Forum 360, for spinning into control, this is Leslie Ungar with my guest Pat Finley. Thank you for joining us on our Global Outlook. Thank you.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Acronist.com, Hudson Cable, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.